And now it's time to talk about Donald Trump and his Venezuela moves, killing two birds with a stone, a single stone, bringing the leader of a drug cartel, ostensibly masquerading as a president of a neighboring country, to book, to justice, American justice, and at the same time opening the taps of Venezuela's largest in the world crude oil reserves, basically to bring down prices and fulfill his electoral promise to the American people. Now we're joined by our guest, Prabhu Dayal, former senior diplomat, and Shrikant Madhav Vaidya, former chairman, Indian Oil. Good evening to you, gentlemen. First,
Good
to
evening.
you, Master Dayal, what do you make of how things are evolving, where this entire Venezuela scenario is concerned, where Bolsonaro was captured because he was flooding America with illegal immigrants and drugs, but now it's all about oil?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. You said that one bird which is going to be killed by Trump's actions is that the oil prices will come down. This is, of course, what President Trump has said today categorically, that he wants the oil prices to be brought down to $50 per barrel and stay there. However, I have some misgivings about the whole thing. Donald Trump wants to control the regime in Venezuela, and he wants total control over its oil resources. So it's not so much an effort to control global oil prices, but to control Venezuelan oil. Uh, Nonetheless, what his actions have ended up doing are to bring about the reality that in his thinking, in Trump's thinking, might is right. And he has done something which is a violation of international law. In fact, UN Secretary General said that the US operation sets a dangerous precedent and that international law appears to have been violated. So the fact is that the US is trying to control Venezuela. Today, the US government said that all major decisions taken by Venezuela's interim government will have to be decided by the US. Although, of course, the interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, has said that Venezuela is an independent country, but nonetheless, she faces a very delicate situation and will have to abide by the dictates of the US to the maximum extent possible. So I think that the game which is being played out is very crude. As a Democratic Party senator has said, it is like stealing Venezuelan oil at gunpoint. So the game is just started. I don't know where all it is going to go. As it is, Trump has said that he wants to get Venezuela, and he says nothing will stop him from doing that. He has signaled unilateralism out and out by yesterday withdrawing from 66 international organizations, agencies, and operations. He signed an order to this effect. So it's a very uncertain game which is going to play out. Of course, Trump is acting as the champion of the global order and as if he is espousing global interests. So his statement that he wants to control Venezuelan oil in order to bring down global oil prices has to be seen with the proverbial pinch of salt.
Okay, uh, Mr. Shrikant Madhav Vaidya, Mr. Vaidya, if I could ask you, you're from the oil industry, you were the chairperson of Indian Oil. Just tell us how the global market for oil works. It's a global commodity. Right now, of course, oil prices already under stress for various reasons. Perhaps what's happened in Venezuela is pushing them down further. But Trump may increase supply of oil from Venezuela in the global market, particularly in the US. Already it's a oil surplus country. It exports oil even to India. But on the other hand, he's also stopping the flow of oil where Russia and Iran are concerned through UN sanctioned or unilateral sanctions. So on one hand, he's opening a tap, and on the other, he's cutting it off. So how will oil prices fall?
Okay, first and foremost, thank you very much for getting me here. First, I would like to clear the Venezuelan issue about the oil. First and foremost, let us be very clear, Venezuelan oil is not a shock for India, nor is it a global shock. Because the global oil consumption today is about 102 million barrels per day, and Venezuela is hardly producing 1 million barrels per day. So it's not at all making a big difference. Maybe over a period of time, it may make a difference. So, and India is presently not importing Venezuelan oil. So we have no direct impact of the oil supply routes or the oil from Venezuela in India. Venezuelan oil, let me tell you, is an extremely heavy and technically difficult oil. Very low API gravity and very high viscosity. It can be processed economically only in certain coastal high complex refineries which have got residue upgradation and coking units. Inland refineries, India has number of inland refineries, they cannot handle this crude unless there is a extensive blending and dilution, and therefore it has limited relevance to the Indian refining systems, basically the inland refineries. More importantly, which President Trump also repeatedly said, that Venezuelan oil sector is facing deep structural problems. Aging reservoirs, damaged production facilities, lack of skilled manpower, and prolonged underinvestment. So any meaningful recovery in Venezuelan oil output would require at least 2 to 3 years, to the best, I'm saying 2 to 3 years, even under very favorable condition. President Trump's actions are therefore not about immediate oil flows, but about a geopolitical leverage, migration pressures, and reasserting strategic influence in the US neighborhood. For India, it is certainly not an earth shattering experience, nor for the oil markets at this point of time. In fact, you must have seen that the oil markets hardly moved even after this move. In fact, I would just like to add, since we are talking of the oil and oil prices, the oil has seen a relatively big era of oil calm. There was a big oil calm in the last year. And last year, we have seen so many different geopolitical upheavals, wars, we have seen sanctions, we have seen disruption of shipping routes, but somehow the oil market has remained very, very calm. It's like the Goldilocks moment, not too hot, not too cold. And all the estimates which have come up, the oil market are continuing to remain calm in the band range. I can risk myself saying that in the range of $55 to $65 in the year 2027, 2026. In fact, this is the first time that 2 consecutive years we'll have an oil calm. So actually the effects of Venezuela are not going to be immediately felt on the oil markets. It will take time for the Venezuelan oil to flow. But as I told you, the Venezuelan oil is very typical oil and it can't be consumed by all the refineries. So it has its own limitations. Coming down to the...
So can it bring down prices in the short, the medium or the long term of oil prices in general in all the international markets?
It can, provided the infrastructure gets built up and at least a couple of years before the oil really starts to flow. But your other question is very valid. On one hand, he's trying to get the oil, Venezuelan oil, and the other place he's trying to cut the tap, especially for the Russian oil for India. But as India has repeatedly said that India is a sovereign nation, and our decision to buy Russian oil was never triggered by politics. It was basically an economic decision, and we went for that because we have to have energy security for 1.4 billion Indian people. So we went for the energy affordability option, which is so important for India. And India also realizes that in 2023, nearly 40% of the oil was coming from Russia, which is not a very good sign in terms of oil security for so much dependence on one country. So which was, the oil import was about 1.9 to 2 million barrels per day from Russia in those days. Now it has come down to 1.2 to 1.3 million barrels per day from Russia. And we are going to different geographies. We are going to US, we are going to Guyana, we are going to West Africa, and of course the Middle East is always there. So India is trying to diversify its oil geographies so that we don't overly dependent on Russia. So that's what India's strategy is. That's what any big economy like India, which is 85 to 90% dependent on imported crude oil, will do.
And if I come to you again, Ambassador Prabhudyal, a diplomat also has a working understanding of how world markets trade works. And I have a question for you. Donald Trump again says that, his goal is to bring down the prices of oil. And now, if he has to take Venezuela, get its oil by force, he'll do it, and he's done it. And he's pushing further on it. But he's telling oil companies in America to push in billions and billions of dollars to refurbish, re-energize, rejig the oil industry in Venezuela. Just tell me, why would a company want to go in to a country with the result that oil prices will come down, the commodity that I'll be extracting, for which I will invest billions of dollars, ultimately want to drive down the price, so it won't be remunerative for me to the extent that it is now. So why would I go and invest?
Well, Gautam, you're absolutely right in questioning why would a foreign company go into Venezuela despite all the problems, upgrade its infrastructure, restore things, and do it so that the entire money that is generated benefits Venezuela. If oil companies go in, let's be very clear, they will do it for profit. The Venezuelans will be really not looked after in the manner in which Trump is claiming they would be. You know, I am a diplomat, as you said. Of course, I don't know so much about the control of oil prices, but I know that international order has to be respected. And I know that despite whatever President Trump is saying, what he has done is a gross violation of the UN Charter. It is a violation of international law. And despite all his pronouncements regarding his intention to control oil prices, I find that the entire operation which he carried out in Venezuela cannot be justified in diplomatic terms. Let me also mention that while he is saying that oil will be generated from there, etc., Mr. Srikant Vaidya has been absolutely right in pointing at the infrastructure problems. The infrastructure is completely not in good order, and that there will be a lot of time and money required to upgrade it. Who will put in the money? Naturally, Trump wants the oil companies to do that. Why would the oil companies do it? If they do it, they would want to the profits. So the profits will go only marginally to Venezuela. Most of them will be sucked away by the oil companies as against the expenditure which they have incurred. It's a con job. And frankly speaking, the Venezuelans know it. And that is why the interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, while she has tried to remain as pacifist and tried to sort of not annoy the Americans too much, yet she has not hesitated in saying that Venezuela's oil belongs to it, it is its own sovereign property, and that Venezuela should have the right to decide whom it wants to sell it, whether it wants to have partnerships with other countries, etc. So this whole game which is going on is one about unlawfully controlling Venezuelan oil, and I find it very, very difficult to condone it.
Okay. Now, Mr. Vaidya, you've been chairperson of Indian Oil. I'd like to imagine you as one of the top executives of any US oil company. Would you go in to Venezuela under the present circumstances?
Okay, so going by the current oil supply demand scenario, today we are in an oil surplus scenario. That is why we are seeing the oil prices are relatively very calm. But this supply scenario is not going to last forever. From 29-30 onwards, again, the oil prices are going to spike. So I think as an oil company executive, I should look at the long-term picture. And Venezuela, as you know, has one of the world's largest reserves. 300 billion tons of oil reserves are there, even more than Saudi Arabia. So probably as a long-term gain, because that's what the oil companies will be looking for when the oil demand is going to pick up after 29-30. I think from that point of time, it is a very sensible move to now go in, start investing, and slowly ramp up the capacity.
Let me remind you that Donald Trump's term ends in 28.
Agreed. But the energy scenario is such that we will be still relying on the fossil fuels for some few decades more. I mean, that is very clearly understood now. So I think with this point in view, I think to invest now slowly and ramp up the capacity slowly so that there is not a big oil shock coming in 29-30. We should slowly ramp up the capacity and so that the world gets used to these new barrels that is getting added and the oil prices will not see the volatility now. And once the whole production comes in, the prices will be under control. I think this long-term vision is probably driving the oil companies to go there in a very rich resource country, and that is what I feel.
Okay, before we end, I have another counter for you. The world is moving away from oil. The biggest consumers of oil in the world might be still, perhaps, in fact, it is China now, not the US. India is among also the biggest consumers of oil. China and India are definitely moving away. So long term, the goal is to move away from fossil fuels in general. So I don't know if Donald Trump is putting all his eggs in the right basket or not, walking out of those institutions as well, 66 UN and non-UN institutions, most of them, more than half of them really, all to tackle climate change. Thank you for joining us this evening, Ambassador Prabhu as well as Shrikant Vaidya.
Thank you very much for having us
Thank
here.
you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.